have to thank all of you, and it really looks like all of you, for coming. On behalf of the Beckerman family, and I want to thank Monica Eppinger and the rest of the Woodbridge Library staff for making this possible. I am Jim Beckerman, number one son, as they say. That doesn't mean I'm the best, that just means I came out first. My dad, Edwin P. Beckerman, died in October. Some terrific people are going to be talking about him today. And in a few minutes, we're going to unveil a plaque donated by the library board in his honor. But I wanted to say something first. I've been a journalist for 40 years, and like all journalists, I live in mortal fear of burying the lead. So here goes. My dad oversaw the building of this library, and he also oversaw the building of 4 other libraries. He was the first director of the United Woodbridge Municipal Library System. I think a lot of you probably know this. So this is a celebration of my dad, but it's also, and this would be my lead, a celebration of this community. Some of you may know that Woodbridge is the oldest township in New Jersey. I think it's also one of the spreadiest. What is it, 24 square miles or something like that? It's big. And it grew up as a series of neighborhoods. And by the early 20th century, each of those neighborhoods had its own little library. Ford's, Island, Port Reading. And women's clubs would donate the books. Residents would pass on their old sets of encyclopedias. These libraries were community efforts, and they were labors of love. But by the 1960s, it became clear that they weren't adequate. So there was a referendum, and it was the town in 1963 that voted to consolidate and update the whole system. So my dad was just brought in to do something that the residents had already decided they wanted. So if you haven't already, I urge you at some point to take a look at this display case here. You'll see how my dad and his staff went through something like 70,000 books in 8 different Woodbridge libraries. They threw out more than 2/3 of the books. I think they found a chemistry book in there that was dated 1913. So I was about 8 when all this was going on. And I remember I had this question about pineapples. I wanted to know whether they grew on trees or whether they came up out of the ground like a stalk of celery. I was very curious about this. And a day or two later, my dad came back with this huge crate of books. It was a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. It was being thrown out from one of the libraries. I don't know from which one. This set was from the 1940s. Israel was still called Palestine. I'm not sure if the Second World War had been won yet. But it did have pineapples in it. So I remember I got out the P volume to look up pineapple, but I accidentally turned to parasite. And there were 2 pages of the worst pictures I ever saw in my life. It was like cows' stomachs with worms coming out of them. It was just horrifying. I was traumatized for life. And of course, I saved it. So this is the book. And if anybody wants to see it later, those pictures are still in there. Anyway, in the end, Ed built 5 new state-of-the-art libraries in Woodbridge, including this one, which is the main library, and it opened in 1974. And he hired and trained the staff. And I think he also learned a lot in the process about libraries and how they should be built and how they could best serve the community. So that meant that he, in time, became a very much in-demand consultant. And over the years, I think 100 towns hired him as an advisor when they were building new libraries. I'm sure both my brothers remember when he used to come home with blueprints and he would spread them out over the living room. We used to think he was an architect. I was like, oh, my dad's an architect. But he also wrote books and he taught classes and he basically trained a generation of librarians. So, and some of them will be talking today about what he did and how he mentored them. Um, so there's one other thing about my dad. I am wrapping up. This is one other thing about my dad, which I'm sure other people here will speak to, is that he was a political animal in the best sense of the word. And I know politics today can sound like a sketchy thing, but Dad knew that politics was a big part of his job. In fact, he wrote a book about this. He knew that it was key to keeping the library funded. You needed to build bridges and create consensus. And over the years, he was friends of mayors of both parties. He knew how to talk respectfully, even to people he disagreed with. There was a paperweight on his desk, and you can actually see it in the case over there. And on it, it said, "Tact is telling someone to go to hell, and they can't wait to get there." It's actually Winston Churchill, I think, said that. But I think that kind of really did sum up his philosophy. So I think in the end, he got about as much out of the Woodbridge as Woodbridge got out of him. And I think a lot of the libraries around the country actually owe a debt to both. Just, my dad never wanted a gravestone. He said either people remember you or they don't. And I get that. But there is a part of me that kind of did wish that there was a place I could go to visit him. But I've come to realize now, since his death, that this library is his monument. And I am really grateful that the library board and the township is putting up this plaque, as it will be doing momentarily. And that kind of makes it official. So I thank all of them, and I thank all of you for coming. And I just want to turn it over to Monica Eppinger, and she is going to say a few words. And I believe the mayor is also going to be coming up, and we are going to proceed with the grand unveiling. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It's a very hard act to follow, but I will tell you it's my great honor to serve the Township of Woodbridge as library director. Those are big shoes to fill. And as I look around the room, I see many of the professional people who have served this town over the years. Library Board President Peg Meyerowitz is here. Current Library Board President Isha Vias is here. Ed Mullen is here. Many of the trustees who have served, Anthony Terabetsky, sitting board member. And I also see so many of the staff that the township has had the great fortune to have as library employees. You heard a lot about what Ed did to build the libraries, but you'd have to have a lot of support from your township and your community to build libraries and support libraries into the future. I don't see him right now, but I'd like to introduce Mayor McCormick, our mayor, who's super supportive of libraries right now.
Good afternoon. So, this event started 20 minutes late, which is surprising for a bunch of librarians, because if I was 20 minutes late returning a book, you'd find me. I just want to say what a pleasure it is. I'm shocked at the turnout. I'm coming here, it's pouring rain, lousy day. I'm thinking, oh, poor Ed's not going to have a lot of people turning out because of the weather, but holy cow, this is great. It just shows you what kind of person he was, what kind of leader he was. Now, I had the opportunity to work with him. I was a town chief financial officer after McGreevy became the mayor January 1st of 1992. So I worked with Ed to some extent. We interacted. I wouldn't say I worked with him directly, but I just remember him and how witty he was and how smart he was. And I'll tell you, Jim McGreevy loved Ed Beckerman, loved him, to the point where after Ed retired and somebody replaced him, and that person retired, he didn't waste any time, and he brought Ed back as a consultant to run the library system again, and Ed was charged with helping him find the new library director. And I remember McGreevy's saying, don't rush. No reason to rush. Because he wanted Ed to run Ed. Well, I don't know how old he was at this time, but he was many years out of retirement. And that just shows the kind of respect that the mayor and council at the time had for Ed. I didn't realize he built 5 libraries. I just listened to his son giving the resume there. That's simply amazing to think somebody could be leading an entity that did that much capital investment, and they're all still here. And by the way, the Colonial Library is going to open in a few months. FEMA was a problem, and the insurance was a problem after Hurricane Ida, but it's going to open up and be better than it ever was. So I'm glad everybody's been patient with that. I do have one of my council running mates here. Kyle Anderson's in the house. Kyle, thanks for coming out. And with that, I'll close. I just want to stay for the picture of the unveiling. Then I got to sneak out. It's a typical summer Sunday, a whole bunch of events. Can't stay in one for more than half an hour. It's the way it is. But thank you for coming out. And thank you for recognizing a guy who has had a major impact on the quality of life in Woodbridge Township. A 30-plus year career, probably 35 when you count everything. If you can live your life and have that be your legacy, that you literally greatly impacted the township of Woodbridge, then God bless him. What a great guy. Thank you.
Do us the honor of unveiling?
Oh, yes, please.
Jim, Wendy.
Hey, don't block it.
Bury the lead.
No, just the 3 of you.
You sure? Come on,
Wendy.
It's fine.
Come on, come on. It's not even a direct order anymore. She doesn't want this anymore.
That's right.
Are we ready?
Yes. 1, 2, 3.
I'd like to announce that we're going to be having an annual award for service. Ed Beckerman was also a Rotarian in town, and the motto of Rotary Club is service above self. So we are going to announce an annual award that we'll present to either a retiree, a librarian, or a library employee, or a trustee who's exemplified service above self. That's an annual award, and we're working on the criteria right now. It'll be the Ed Beckerman Award for Service. And thank you. I see about 50 candidates in the room here today, so I'd have to say we've got to get started on that. And at this point, I would like to invite, does anyone want to come up and say some words from the family? Wendy has been really worked very hard at this event, and I'd like to welcome Wendy to the podium. Wendy.
First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, awesome. As Monica said, after I finish blabbling along a little bit, anyone who would like to share their memories of Ed, we invite you to come up and talk. You can stand if you have a big voice like me. You can stand wherever you are, or you're welcome to come up to the microphone. I'm Wendy Rottweiler, and I'm one of Ed's daughters-in-law. He was the best father-in-law a woman could ask for. Caring and engaged grandfather to our children, and my buddy in sports fandom. Even though I root for the Mets and he grew up over Yankee Stadium, we both could agree on the New York Giants during football season. But he was also my mentor who brought me into librarianship and taught me by example what was important and how to lead. I've done a fair amount of writing over the years, both professional and personal. I found stringing together a few words for today among the hardest things I've ever tried to write. Perhaps it's because I feel that there's so much at stake. How to give you a sense of what an incredible man Ed Beckerman was. He was a positive influence in so many lives, but perhaps my job is easier today because so many of you knew him and know this already. Ed believed that public libraries are the heart and soul of a community and that a public library is responsive to the needs of its community. An inclusive public library that meets the needs of its community, whether educational, aspirational, or just plain old recreational, is a public institution that a community can be proud of and that can be proud of itself. Ed recruited me to be a librarian, like so many he recruited before and after me. I mean, if he met you at a party and you impressed him, he'd ask what you were doing. And if you weren't fully committed to a profession, he was already on you to rope you into, thinking about library school. He believed it was one of the best professions of service a person who cared about people, community, education, and democracy could commit to. He knew it would be a good fit for me better than I knew myself. But he also wanted the best and brightest in the profession because he understood and believed with all his considerable heart that without a strong, creative, driven staff, a library is and can do nothing. In today's terms, he was data-driven. He believed statistics, particularly demographics, would lead to the best outcomes for library planning and service, and also make the strongest case for library support to the powers that be. But he never lost sight of the fact that behind every number was a real person with real needs, obstacles, and feelings. And the best way to serve them, to serve the community, was with a staff that was passionate, engaged, and committed. And the best way to have that staff was to recruit, support, and retain them. On my first day on the job, I was given a tour of this building, the main library. The librarian taking me around explained that Ed and his assistant director, Jack Fishman, had sought to hire strong personalities that might have scared off weaker administrators at other libraries. Actually, the incomparable Jackie Rapacki might not have been quite so tactful in her analysis, but the idea was the same. Strong personalities with ideas and, God forfend, opinions would produce the best library services for a community. No sheep or weak-willed staff for Ed and Jack. Over the years, Ed expounded on his highly successful library management techniques. He explained to me that the unions are an administrator's best friend. It can help you get the best out of your employees and show your support for them. I remember raucously singing, "Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?" after a couple of memorable family dinners. He believed that if you believe in people more times than not, they will exceed your expectations. Even-keeled, you like how I got that sailing reference in nearly all circumstances, he rejoiced in people's successes and brainstormed and problem solved with you if things didn't go according to plan. As I was working through what to say, I found myself torn between talking about Ed, my father-in-law and friend, and Ed, the library director, consultant, author, and teacher. And what I realized was that they are the same things. Not that Ed was his job, but that Ed's humanity, his belief that treating people with dignity and respect would result in a better world for all of us, shone through all aspects of his life. And that all the things I learned from him about librarianship were really life lessons that have made me a better mother, person, colleague, and friend.
My name is Janet Burkhead. I have been a librarian at the Long Branch Free Public Library since 1991. In the early 90s, we were in really bad shape. I was originally hired as a children's librarian and later, under a later director, transferred to the Adult Services Department. But I had just gone through a horrendous outbreak of mold in the department that took forever to fix, and I didn't know enough to say, I can't deal with this. I was trying to select the books for throwing out myself. Also, we weren't automated. After the boss who hired me left, the board hired Ed Beckerman as an interim director. And he was with us for about a year or a year and a half, I think. And he basically saved us. I mean, the morale was horrible when Steve left. We weren't automated. We were still using the old hand punch. He didn't have the luxury of interacting with the staff probably as much as he would have liked, because he had to figure out what was the best consortium for us to join in order to become automated. And he chose for us the Libraries of Middlesex Automation Consortium, which has worked out really well. And he was a steadying presence. He was always pleasant and kind. But he basically dug us out of a really bad hole. And the library is thriving today, in part because of him and in part because of our current director. And I'm the only one who actually worked under him who's still there. Although the current director, he dropped in to offer advice to the director before the current one. And Tanya, the current director, was working as assistant director at that point. So she saw him often when he came to see Ingrid, and we all ran into him at NJLA. But wonderful person. I wish I'd gotten to know him as a fraction of as well as any of the rest of you who have spoken. But he did great things for Long Branch.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Tumblety. I'm the retired executive director of the New Jersey Library Association, and I'm joined by my colleagues who would like to introduce themselves.
I'm Irene Goldberg, retired from the Monroe Township Public Library and a mentee of Ed Beckerman back in the early 70s when I first entered the profession.
Oops, sorry.
Eileen Palmer, retired director of Libraries of Middlesex.
And I'm Bob Belvin. I am the director of the New Brunswick Library and how do I say this politely? Ed conned me into taking that job 32 years ago. He knew better than I that it fit.
What we'd like to say is we represent the statewide perspective of what Ed Beckerman meant to the libraries of New Jersey. Ed was a past president of the New Jersey Library Association and proudly would attend all of our conferences. But if you did any history of the New Jersey libraries, any report, any statewide initiative, the name of Ed Beckerman was always there. So he made not only a great contribution to you all here in Woodbridge, he made a phenomenal contribution to libraries throughout the state of New Jersey. And that is why we are here today, representing the statewide perspective of a great giant in library service, Ed Beckerman, and we're honored to do so.
Hello, my name is Kyle Anderson. As the mayor pointed out, I'm one of the council people. Unfortunately, fortunately, I didn't have as busy of a schedule as he had, and I'm able to stay here and listen to so many reminisce about their experiences with Mr. Beckerman. I did not know Mr. Beckerman personally, but I did know his son, or do know his son, and had the pleasure of working with Lee for many years in his role at TV 35. And listening to him speak and hear about his father and how passionate he was about his fellow man and the importance of our library system has moved me to want to come up and speak about what this library has meant to myself and to my family. We moved here in 1975, and I unfortunately had lost my mother when I was at the age of 2. So I hadn't been to a library until my stepmother, my father recently remarried, and we moved here in February of 75. And this was the very first library that I ever set my eyes on. And I was always in awe of the Woodbridge Library. And I spent a lot of time downstairs in the children's section. And now I've raised 5 children here in town, and they all went to Woodbridge High School. What they don't know, they think that I'm a chronically late person. I'm not. I intentionally come late because I tell them, go and wait for me in the library. All right? Go and wait for me in the library. Start your homework. Discover the library. My mother did that with us as well. I lived in Islin, so I would have to walk to the Islin Library, but on a special day, we came here. And it was a special day when we came to this library. And I'm now 6 years the county superintendent for Middlesex County. And I see what, unfortunately, the school systems that have had to eliminate their library systems, and when we go around and evaluate the schools. And it's very unfortunate. But we try to advocate through Ms. Effinger and to speak about the importance of the library. But it is through Mr. Beckerman's legacy that you're all here and this library is here. And libraries are going through a transformation, as we see, Starbucks in them and all of these other fancy things. But this is what I always envision a library to be. And I'm sure that there will be changes one day, but Mr. Beckerman's legacy will always remain in his township. And I believe his first son that spoke talked about this community and how our communities support our library system shows how much we really care about our town and who we want to be as a culture and have a town with culture. So continue to support our library systems, continue to frequent them, and pick up your children late as I do. Thank you very much.
Okay, a moment you've been waiting for, near the end. I just wanted to, I talked a little bit at the outset about, just sort of a summary of my dad's career, because I wanted to get that out there, but I didn't really talk too much about my own relationship with him. One of the many things that I took for granted about my dad is that he paid for my college education, so I didn't have to spend my life in debt. And I guess about 10 or 15 years ago, I was feeling a little guilty about the poor use I had made of his money. I hadn't studied engineering or architecture or anything important. I was a liberal arts major. I'd taken courses in English and art history and Western Civ and psychology and terrible stuff like that. And it was embarrassing. So I kind of was apologizing to my dad, and he said, "Did you study things that interested you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Did you broaden your horizons?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Then I didn't waste my money." And I thought that was just such a lovely thing to say. And in fact, it turned out that my little smattering of art and here and history there was the perfect background for what I ended up doing, which is journalism, where you know very little about a lot. So that's really been, journalism has been one of the great joys of my life. Chuck Polino just left here, but he was the editor of the News Tribune, and it was my dad talking to him that got me my first job in the newspaper. So anyway, that's been one of the great joys of my life, along with music and this fellow named Tom that you might know about. So anyway, that was what my dad was like, and I think my brothers would agree. He wanted us to follow our own bliss. He didn't try to make us live up to some ideal he had in his head of what we should be. When I was 11 years old, I got really into astronomy, and that was the year of the moon landing. And in 1969, we did our cross-country National Lampoon family vacation. And I made my dad stop at every damn observatory and planetarium and meteor crater between here and Los Angeles. And he did. And I remember we went to Mount Palomar Observatory in California. And Mount Palomar is not called Mount Palomar for nothing. It is at the top of the mountain. And to get there, you had to drive up this long and windy road that circled the mountain. It's kind of the thing you see in the Roadrunner cartoons, if you can imagine that. So we went up slowly on this one-lane road, and on one side is the mountain, and on the other side is a precipice. Thousands of feet down, no guardrail. We got up to the top, we see the giant telescope, and then we go slowly winding down on the one-lane road with the precipice right there. And I don't know now, I can't remember if my dad seemed particularly preoccupied at that moment. I probably wasn't paying any attention. I was probably thinking, oh, it was so cool, I just saw the world's biggest telescope. Apparently, and I learned this later, the brakes had given out on his Oldsmobile. So all the way down, we were inches away from plummeting to our deaths. And I guess he must have inched it down, pulling the emergency brake every few seconds. I'm not sure what he did, but he got us down in one piece. But that was how much he wanted to encourage our interests. It was enough to put all of our lives in danger. A few years ago, I managed to achieve one dream I'd always had. I wrote a musical, or co-wrote it, and it had a brief off-Broadway run. And the biggest investor in the show was Dad, of course, because he wanted to encourage me. Only he wouldn't use his real name. He was terrified our mom would find out. So in the program, he called himself Thomas Curley. So I guess just in closing, I wanted to thank Thomas Curley for all the encouragement over all those years. And I hope he was even half as proud of me as I am and was of him. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Like my brother said, I can't believe this turnout. This is just amazing. And from so many different parts of my dad's life, his family, his extended family, his staff, his friends, just really amazing. And I thank you.